The title of the message this morning is Who is in Control of Your Life? I had this conversation with some of the guys from the prison yesterday, and the question is one that is pertinent to all of us. The word sovereign, sometimes we get a little confused about what some of these big theological words mean. The word sovereign is basically asking that question. Who's in control? Who is in control? So the question this morning I want to give you is the same question I gave these guys yesterday. Who is sovereign? Now we all know, if we've been to church very often in our lives, that we as Christians, we as Orthodox Christians, believe that God is sovereign over the entire universe. He is in control of all things. The book of Hebrews says that Jesus himself holds this universe together. And even scientists will tell you today they can't quite figure out how it is that this universe hasn't just already flown apart in a million pieces. And the book of Hebrews 2,000 years ago began already telling us and describing it to us then. It is Jesus himself that holds all things together. So we know that this word sovereign, who is in control of these big things, is Jesus. It's always, as we heard this morning in our Sunday school message, it's always safe if somebody asks you a question in church to answer Jesus, right? So we know the one that's in control is Jesus. Jesus Christ is in control. He is sovereign. But the question is that if this sovereign God, who is in control of all things, then because He loves you and because He desires for you to freely choose to love Him, gives you free will. Listen carefully, this is an important question. He gives you free will. And He says, now you choose who's going to be in control of your life. Are you going to be in control, or is He going to be in control? Are you going to choose to make Jesus Lord of your life, or is the choice you make, I know better than God? I know better than He knows. I know how to direct this thing. God, you haven't quite figured out all of my problems yet. I know what my problems are, and you haven't really figured it out yet. So I'm going to take control. Or are you going to say to Him, I'm putting you in control. I'm willingly, out of my free will, choosing to make you Lord of my life. Is that the choice you would make? That's the question that we're going to be asking this morning. And Jesus does it, as we learned in Sunday school this morning, in an interesting way because He keeps asking questions. He keeps asking questions. What are these questions meant to do? The questions are meant to make us think about how we need to answer these questions. They're to cause everybody that Jesus is talking to. Now, here's the thing I want you to see this morning. That as we get into this text, you're going to see Jesus engage people, and some of these people are the religious leaders of the day. So on the front end, he is talking to some religious leaders that are trying to trap Him into saying something that will convict Him of coming either against the Jewish faith or against the Roman government. And either way, Jesus will lose. So they're trying to trap Him in this trap. What Jesus is going to do is be asking them questions that is leading them back. Okay, religious leaders, watch this very carefully. This is important. Religious leaders, you good Christians, you're trying to trap me because you don't like who I am. And what Jesus is going to do is pose questions to these religious leaders and the people, these Herodians that are part of the Roman government, that are going to try to trap them into saying, you got to choose. Are you going to make the rules as you go along, you religious leaders? Or are you going to make God sovereign in your life? Then He's going to tell a parable. So He's going to get the picture here. He's going to have this engagement. I want you to see this as we get into the text this morning. He's going to have this engagement, this relationship with these people, he's going to have a conversation where they're trying to trap him, and he's going to be asking them questions that basically are leading them back to this question. Are you going to be sovereign, or am I going to be sovereign? Then he's going to tell this parable that brings it home. I mean, he's going to bring home the message, and in this parable that basically is causing them to think about this same thing. In fact, the text is going to tell us they understood he was speaking this parable about them. They knew it. They understood it. And then he's going to have another conversation with people, real life people, that are going to basically get back to this same point. So obviously Jesus thinks this is an important question. For Christians, all of us that say we believe, all of us that warm seats on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night or whenever we meet for church, all of us that profess to be Christ followers, are we Christian in the sense of being a Christian? I was born into a Christian family, therefore I'm a Christian. No, you're not. For some of you this morning, that'll be bad news. Because some of you sitting here this morning, maybe you think that you're a Christian simply because you were born into a family where somebody was a really good Christian. And because of that, maybe some of that kind of rubbed off on you. So the stardust got on you, and now you're a Christian. No, that's not how it works. He says, will you, that in the free will I've given you, make me sovereign in your life? That's what Jesus is asking. Will you decide to follow me? I told this little story yesterday, and it's a story that's been told a lot, but since nobody there had heard it before, maybe some of you haven't heard it before either. Have you heard the story about the guy that is a tightrope walker? And he decides he's going to walk the tightrope in some of the most dangerous places in the world. And one of the places he decides is the most dangerous place would be over Niagara Falls. Now that's a pretty scary place. So he gets all the permits he needs. He stretches the cable across Niagara Falls, and he gets up on the tight wire, and the crowds have gathered, and they're beginning to buzz. When's he going to get up there? So in the dramatic moment, he's about 5 minutes late. And he gets on the wire, and he acts like he's going to fall, and then he just lightly walks across, and he gets all the way across the wire, and he gets down on the other side. He made it look so easy. And on the other side of the falls, he's got a wheelbarrow. And he picks up the wheelbarrow, and he pulls it up, and he's on the cable, and he's bouncing the tire on the cable. And he says, how many of you believe I can walk across this cable with this wheelbarrow? And the crowd's going nuts. They're going, yeah, man, we believe you can do it. We know you can do it. You made that look easy. Go for it, man. Roll that wheelbarrow across the cable. And he says, you really believe I can do it? And the crowd goes, yes, we believe you can do it. He says, come here and get in. You see, that's what Jesus is saying to us. You believe in me? Come and get in. Come and get in. I'm in control. I can do this thing. Come and get in the wagon. Come and get in the wheelbarrow. Now that's the challenge to all of us. That's the challenge that Jesus is posing this morning in this whole sovereignty question. Okay, you believe that I'm God. He says even Satan believes that, and all the demons believe that. So what's the difference between you and demons? If that's all there is, there's really no difference from that respect. The difference for the Christian is being a Christ follower, we choose freely in our own free will to get in the wheelbarrow and put Him in control of our lives. This is the point that Jesus is going to get back to again and again this morning. Now let me set the scene before we get into the text. The scene is this. It's right before Passover. People are beginning to gather in the city of Jerusalem. And on the Temple Mount there are thousands of people. And it's just sort of a halfway organized chaos. people from all over the world and speaking many different languages, and the money changers are there, and the people selling goats and sheep and doves are there, and there's all this commerce going on, and there's all this confusion going on, and people are going and trying and getting in line, and they're waiting in long lines to get in to see the priest to have the animals they brought sacrificed, the atonement of sin. And many of the people have come, many of the young people have come, because at least once in a lifetime they were required to go to the Temple Mount and pay the temple tax. At least once in their lifetime they were called on to do that. And so those people are coming in. And so this crowd is rousing, and Jesus is on the Temple Mount. And people have begun to hear about Jesus. They've begun to hear about the miracles. They've begun to hear about this Messiah, people were calling him. And so there is a whole group of people surrounding Jesus, and he's teaching. And so all of this is going on, and on the outskirts of the people listening to Jesus are the people that are going to have this conversation. They want to trap Jesus because they have been in control of this religious thing for a long time, and they don't want to let go of that control. Some of you have been in control of your own lives for a long time. And it's time for you to let go and put him in control, to get in the wheelbarrow and trust him. So that's where we are this morning as we get to this. So let's look at some of the things we will be engaging with this morning. Luke chapter 20. Will you choose to acknowledge his sovereignty and yield to his authority? That's really the question. We'll begin in chapter 19, verse 45, to kind of lay the foundation this morning, and then we'll jump into 20. Then he entered the temple area and began driving out those who were selling. Now you had all the money changers and all the people there that were selling the animals. Here's kind of what would happen. People would come, and maybe they brought a sheep from a long distance. They've selected this sheep they're going to take to the Temple Mount to be sacrificed. And so they get there, and the priest examines the animal and says, this animal's not perfect. It has to be a perfect sacrifice. So now if you'll just take your sheep, your less than perfect sheep, your defective sheep, down to where they're selling animals, we've made this provision down there, and they'll sell you a perfect animal. Of course, when you went down there, here's what would happen. It's just like when you go to the used car. You go, I thought my car was worth $20,000 on a trade-in, and they go, no, it's worth $5,000. So you take your less than perfect sheep down there, and they go, this one's worth $0.10, and this one's going to cost you $25. So you do the trade. Now, here's what would happen. The people that were doing the selling of the animals, they had to rent their spaces just like at a flea market. And so they were renting from the temple priests. The priests were then pocketing part of that money. They were getting the perfect lambs up there. They were sacrificing them. And Josephus, one of the early historians, who was, by the way, no friends of the Christians, had this whole thing spied out, and he said, this is nothing but a gimmick for making money. And we're not having, he said the Jews had decided they didn't want any interruption in any of this. And Jesus is causing a bit of a stink. Because he comes in here and he starts driving out the sellers of these animals, the people that are selling these things. And he says, it is written, he said to them, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. So with the historical background being there, understand what's taking place. Every day, he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priest, notice who's coming, the chief priest is the highest position in the land. The chief priest doesn't send his underlings to do this dirty work. He's coming personally, and he's coming right in Jesus' face. The chief priest and the teachers of the law and the leaders among the people were trying to kill Jesus. Yet they could not find any way to do it because all the people hung on his words. So here's the political quandary. You have the Roman guards there who have only ones that have authority to kill. The Jewish leaders, they could beat a person, they could punish them dramatically, but their line stopped at killing somebody. So they had to get Romans' permission. That's why the Herodians Michael Ramsden described earlier were invited into this fray. So they couldn't find a way to kill him, so they were trying to trap him. Jesus is going to respond to those who are watch this, the same thing Michael was talking about this morning, who are asking questions that they really don't want answers to. They're only asking questions trying to trap a person, only asking questions to try to trip somebody up, only asking questions to try to make somebody look like a fool. And Jesus is going to respond to them, the same thing Michael Ramsden said this morning, by asking questions, because he's going to get to the real heart of the issue here. So watch this. Chapter 20. One day he was teaching the people in the temple courts and preaching the gospel, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law together with the elders came to him. They asked him this question: "Tell us by what authority you are doing these things. Who gave you this authority?" Now, this is an important question. It's a legitimate question. But they're asking it trying to bring some condemnation upon Jesus. Verse 3. Jesus replied, "I will ask you a question." Does that sound familiar? Those of you who've been in evangelism class, here's Jesus' model. He's asked a question. He says, "I'm going to ask you a question." Jesus is going to get to the bottom of why they're asking their question. John's baptism, he's talking about John the Baptist here. Was it from heaven or from men? Now, what he's really saying there is, was John the Baptist baptizing people because that baptism was from God, and he was told by God to do this, as John the Baptist said? Or was it from men? Was John just making all this stuff up? Was John just trying to trick people? He wanted a better grade of locust to eat or honey to suck on. Now, is that his cause? So the crowd that Jesus asked this question to, they go off and they get in their little holy huddle. Now, I want you to notice what they're asking each other here, because it's important. Are they asking each other the question that Jesus asked, or are they conniving? Watch what they do. He says, they discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say from heaven, he will ask, why didn't you believe John?" Because this is the same group that rejected John the Baptist's baptism. And then he said, "But if we say from men, all the people will stone us." And that probably won't be very good. We don't like that result, because they were persuaded by John. And they were persuaded he was a legitimate prophet. So the problem is, we tried to set Jesus up with the Herodians and the Jews here. And now we're stuck between the Herodians and the Jews here. Because if we say that it's from God, they're going to say, "Why didn't you believe us? Why didn't you believe John?" And if we say it's from man, the people that are the Jews there that believe John and believe what Jesus is teaching are going to pick up stone and stone him. So now they're stuck. So now they go, okay, break. Come out of their holy huddle. They come back to Jesus. Here's what they do. So they answered, "We don't know where it was from. We don't know. Have no idea." It's the only way they can get out. They look kind of foolish, but they don't have a whole lot of choices here. Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." Jesus says, "Okay, you've tried to trap me. Now I'm going to teach you something," because from here he's going to go into a parable. So watch what he does here. Oh, they were provoking Jesus sort of like a court jester. I don't know if you know the whole thing about the court jester. They would usually pick somebody that was kind of not really physical and somebody fairly small, and they would dress them in funny costumes in the court, and people would throw food at them, and they would mock them, and they would tell jokes, and so they were trying to treat Jesus this same way. They're trying to trap him, and everybody would try to trap the court jester with these funny little questions, and the court jester would try to sneak his way out of those questions and try to make people laugh. So they were provoking Jesus not a whole lot unlike the court jesters. So Jesus unfolds their intent, and he is silent in answering. Sometimes we don't cast pearls before swine. We simply say, okay, when you're asking the question for the right reason, then we'll give an answer. It's an important reality. Then he's going to tell this parable of the evil vintner. Now, vintner is just a winemaker. So he's going to tell this parable, and this parable is going to bring the same point home, because these people know that he's telling this parable about them. So watch how the parable goes. He went on to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, rented it to some of the farmers, and went away for a long time. Now, in the book of Mark, he tells a little more detail here. This vineyard that he plants, he gets the best plants and he puts in there. In Mark, he tells that he built a wall around it to keep those that were outside from scavenging and coming in and raiding the crop. He builds a wine press right in the middle of the vineyard, which was unusual in those days. Most people had to collect their grapes and carry them to another wine press someplace. But he builds this wine press right there. It's a totally self-contained situation. And he rents it out and goes away, it says, for a long time. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants so that they would give him some fruit. But the tenant beat the servant and sent him away empty-handed. So this would have been the way he would have collected rent. He got a part of the crop. So what has the guy done? He's built this beautiful place, perfectly self-contained, the best vines, and he rents it out so somebody can make a living, and he sends his servant to go collect the rent in the form of a harvest, part of the harvest. So they beat the servant and they send him away. So the landlord, he sends another servant. But that one they also beat and treated him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent a third, and they wounded him and threw him out. Now, in case you haven't got the picture yet, let me just tell you where this is going. The guy that owns the vineyard is representing the person of God. God is sending his servants back into the harvest because he is sovereign. He is Lord. And he's sending them back, their servants back. And this is representative of all the prophets that were sent in the Old Testament times. And what did they do to most prophets? They beat them. They beheaded them. They cursed them. They thought they were a bunch of guys that were just out for themselves. And God is sending his servants, and they're beating them and destroying them and not listening to what they're saying. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my son, whom I love. Perhaps they will respect him." And so, in the parable, he sends his own son. Now, get the picture. Jesus is telling this parable. He is the Son. He is the Son whom God has sent into the world. Perhaps people will respect him. But when the tenants saw him, the son, they talked the matter over. "This is the heir," they said. "Let's kill him, and the inheritance then will be all ours." Nietzsche said, "God is dead. Long live me." So they kill the son. So they throw him out of the vineyard. Now in Mark, this goes on much longer. He actually sends many more of his servants. They kill them, they beat them, they send them back bruised. How would you like to have been a servant of that master? Number 28. Come on, it's your turn. You go to the vintners. You collect the rent. That's you and me. They threw him out of the vineyard and they killed him. What a bizarre story this seems to be, isn't it? The guy that owns the vineyard just seems weak and pitiful and helpless. He seems totally incapable of going back and collecting this vintage, his rent from the ones he's rented this out to. He seems ineffective, ineffectual, and uncaring that his servants are dying on the scene. And he seems certainly incapable of doing anything about these bizarre, crazy guys that are just killing people and maiming them and sending them away. But he's not helpless. And here's the end of the story. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. In the end, this master, this Lord, this one who is sovereign over all things is not ineffective. What he is, listen to me carefully, he's patient. But there is an end, listen, there is an end to his patience. He loves them, and he wants the best for them. Otherwise, he would not have built the vineyard and put them in this place, put Adam and Eve in the garden, put you and I here. He wants the best for you. And all of these servants have come and said, we're here representing the master, and we kill them and wreck them and send them away injured. But in the end, God is still in control. He is patient. He is loving. But listen to me, He is just. He is just. And He will come again. And there will be an end to this. And those that have not listened, those that have abused what God has given them, in the end will find that God is just. Now, these guys that heard this, they knew it was about them, and they didn't like this much. So let's look at what happens here. So he's interpreting the parable, and I told them a viewpoint of the owner, and the owner, as we said, is God. It's amazing that this owner seems so soft and tolerant and even weak, but in the end, he comes and he dishes out his justice. He is patient, he is gracious, he's merciful, but he is absolutely just. So let's look at the rest of the story. 2 Peter 3. Verse 10 says, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed." This is not, listen, I want you to hear me, this is not a hell, fire, and brimstone message, turn or burn kind of thing. But it is for you to understand that there is a limit to what God will endure in His patience. And every one of us have been given the choice of whether we're going to make Him Lord of our personal lives. But in the end, He is sovereign over all of this, and He will come, and He will divvy up, separating the sheep from the goats. And I'm just here to say this morning that if you are not sure that you belong to Him and that you have made Him, okay, I acknowledge Jesus is the Son of God. But you have not made Him Master and Lord of your life. You've not got in the wheelbarrow. Maybe this is your morning to get in the wheelbarrow. Maybe this is your morning to say, you know, God's been calling me to do this, and I haven't done it because I've been afraid. Maybe you need to get in the wheelbarrow and trust Him to be there with you. Maybe it's time. So let's look at the other perspective here, the vintners. They could give all kinds of excuses, couldn't they? Don't we give all kinds of excuses? Well, maybe when I'm older. Maybe when I'm feeling better. Maybe when I have more time. You know, you'll never have more than 24 hours in a day. You never will. It's always going to have the same amount of time. One day I'll have more time. They're going to make excuses too. Well, how valuable is the vineyard anyway? This guy's got a lot of money. He owns a bunch of stuff. He doesn't need these grapes. We really need this extra harvest. I really need to stay home tonight and be sure that things are attended to here. I got to feed the dog. We're out here scratching in the dirt, the vintners say, while this guy goes on a journey. He goes off traveling the world and he leaves us here to scratch in the dirt. Who owns this vineyard? Who owns this vineyard? Who's sovereign over all things? He is God. There's a harvest every year, and they're making a living, but they don't seem very eager to leave that place, do they? So here's the real question. What's so tough? What is so difficult that I can't give up being Lord? That I can't give up being master of my life? That I trust me more than I trust Him? What's so hard here? Well, I'll tell you what's tough. I just don't know if I can trust Him or not. I'll tell you what's tough. I got all this stuff coming at me, and I'm just not sure about that I've got time. I've got all this stuff coming at me, and I've got to attend to this right now. I'll tell you what's so tough. I'm scratching in the dirt out here, and He's off wandering around the universe somewhere. He doesn't care about me. And God says, will you accept my lordship? Will you make me master? Will you make me sovereign in your life? Or are you going to keep that privilege that I've given you? You can do that to yourself. That's the whole message this morning. In a nutshell, that's it. Jesus is engaging these people, trying to trap Him, and He's saying, please hear this message. Please hear what I'm telling you. Please understand that God is sovereign, and one day He's coming back, and He's not coming as the lamb. He's coming as the lion. And please understand that what He wants is to protect you and keep you and guide you through this life. You can trust Him. Listen, you can trust Him to get in the wheelbarrow. You can. I promise you can. And yet so many of us will continue to try to figure out why we shouldn't trust God. For God so loved the world, that's you and me, that He gave His only Son, that whosoever would believe in Him, that word believe is a strong, strong word. It infers more than just an intellectual assent or an understanding of who He is. It infers that you're trusting Him. Whoever would believe in Him would not perish, but would have everlasting life. Romans 12:1 and 2 says this, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your body a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable act of worship. Be ye not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Watch this. So that you may know what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Pastor, how can I know what God's will is for me? How can I know? I'm going to come up here and I'm going to stick my toe in the water and I'm going to see if I like this God thing or not. And I'm going to make a decision then if I'm going to get in or if I'm going to get out. And God says, come and present your body a living sacrifice, all in or nothing. Stick my toe in the water. It's not quite warm enough. I'm not going to get in this pool. Present your body as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. That's what's holy and acceptable to God. Toe stickers are not holy and acceptable to God. Get in the wheelbarrow. Which is your reasonable, watch this, Doesn't sound very reasonable to me, preacher. This is your reasonable act of worship. He says you do that, and you're going to know what is the perfect will of God for you. Get in. There's no demilitarized zone in this spiritual war. There's no place that you're safe. The only place of safety is in the most unlikely place of all. It's in the wheelbarrow, where it does not look safe at all. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for this day. We ask you, Lord, to bless this message in the hearts of your servants here today. May they be, their lives be, every one of their lives be, Lord, here today, I pray, glorifying to you. An absolute, tremendous witness of who you are in them. And then, Lord, as we go out of here today, make us ever aware of those around us that so desperately need to hear the message, that we might share the one who can walk on water and walk on wires, who has the power of creation in his tongue and the power in his hands to hold it all together. When our world is flying apart, Jesus is holding it all together. And I pray, Lord, that you will impress upon every heart today that truth, that when we go out of here today, we're better prepared to share Jesus Christ with a lost and dying world than we've ever been before. And I pray this in Jesus' holy and precious name. Amen.